But I did notice there was a lot of people that were cycling that were kind of weekend warriors that all had bellies. And I thought, this makes no sense. I see some of these people out riding for so long, and how is it that they're not skinny? How is it they're not losing weight? Um, and uh, I realized it's because
Wayne, how did you find carnivore?
I actually thought I invented it by accident. um, it was about 2.5 years in that I discovered that it was actually a thing and that people were doing this. Um, Started off with I found myself sitting across the doctor's office from a heart surgeon who's telling me he's not going to operate yet. And I asked him, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, you've got heart pains and or chest pains, and we've done this test." And I said, "No, I don't." And when he walked into the office, it was kind of comical because he was looking at his flip chart or his notes, and he comes in the room, he says hello, and then he looks up and he sees me. And there I am, I'd just come from a bike ride. I'm looking fit. I've got a tight shirt on. I'm 60 years old, man presenting with chest pains, and I don't fit the bill. so, so I said, I don't have chest pains. And he said, oh, well, it says here in your notes you do. And from my family doctor, I'd after the COVID lockdown, I'd gotten a new family doctor because I hadn't had one in years, and so she called me in for an interview and asked me if I had anything that's ailing me. And I was hoping to get a prescription for physiotherapy because I was having some problems with my back and my neck and my chest, and I'd gone through kind of a bit of a traumatic breakup with my ex-wife, and she got really nasty, and I got my diaphragm kind of gets stuck, and I was in this not in a good position that way. But if you read the book, what is it? The Body Keeps the Score. It's kind of an interesting look at how muscles tense up and stuff. Anyway, so this is what I was describing, and um, so she sent me away, and then she had me come back in for another meeting because I had uh, a skin thing that she wanted to take off. Thought that was something that we should look at. And while I was in the waiting room this time, or just waiting for her, they put a blood pressure cuff on me, and just as a routine thing before I went in. So I went in, and they said, well, first of all, the assistant said, "Oh, you've got your blood pressure's high." And I said, "No, it's not." And she said, "Yes, it is. It's 140." And I was surprised by this. So when I saw the doctor, now she's all in a flap because I've got high blood pressure. And I said, well, there's a whole backstory to this. I mean, there was the stress I was dealing with. I'd gone through this trauma. I wasn't used to being in around people because lockdown, 2 years without seeing anybody, pretty much. Um, and I was working on a contract remotely where I was working with people it was kind of below my regular skill level, and it was frustrating. And so I would sit there day after day, just kind of seething at the situation because I didn't see things were going the way it would go if I was in the management position. And I was plowing through bags of chips and Coke to deal with the stress. And so that was the situation. Anyway, so I went and I got a blood pressure check on my own. And it was 120 over 80. And then I went again, and it was 120 over 80. And every time I went, it was that. But when I was in her doctor's office, it was high. So I said, I don't think this is unusual. But anyway, she said, well, we're going to send you for some other tests. And it didn't indicate this had anything to do with the heart or anything else. But I ended up going for an EKG, and then she called me and she said, if you feel any lightheadedness or any numbness in your left eye, go see a doctor. I'm thinking, what are you talking about? And so, long story short, I end up getting a calcium scan. And so here I find myself in the surgeon's office describing to me. Now, I had online access to what the score was and what the scan said. So when I met with him, I knew what it was and what they'd found. And so he was acting as if I was going to die tomorrow. And it turns out that, he said you're in the 70th percentile for the people your age in terms of the amount of calcium I had. And that's kind of worrying, but so he wanted to put me on statins. Now she wanted to put me on statins before, right away, without just because of my age before all this happened. So here we are, and now he wants to do that. And I said, well, I got some problems with my skeletal muscles and stuff, and I've read the the side effects, and that's one of the areas that gets affected. So I don't think we should right now until I deal with this other thing. And so home I went and I started doing some research. And um, what I came up with, I wasn't looking at the YouTube videos everyone else seems to be describing. I was looking at Harvard Medical Journal and National Institutes of Health studies and so forth about what kind of things cause high blood pressure and what kind of things cause elevated LDL. Because when I first met with my doctor, she said that was high. Well, it was on the high end of normal. It wasn't exponentially high, but this is a concern for her. So I looked into it to figure out, okay, so is there something I should be concerned about? And what kind of things cause it to be higher or lower, and so forth. And pretty quickly, I came across a lot of information on the effects of diabetes and how that has a whole bunch of different things. One of the things that I was experiencing was I was getting up about a dozen times at night, going to the bathroom, which I know when you get older that becomes a problem, but that was extreme. And I just thought, well, it's getting older. But then I spotted this as one of the things. If your blood sugar, if you have an insulin problem. So I went down that path, and I checked a whole bunch of the boxes for what seemed to be diabetic situation. Or now I've learned that there's this thing called, what is it, insulin resistance or pre-diabetes. So I thought, well, okay, so no more Coke and no more chips. That's probably a good start. When I went in for the heart scan, the calcium scan, after the scan, I just thought there was an interesting aside to this. The technician that was doing the scan, afterwards, he had to take my blood pressure to make sure I wasn't going to fall on the way out of the hospital after being subject to this. And he looked at my blood pressure and he said, "That's excellent. Get the hell out of my hospital." So I didn't think I had a lot to worry about. Anyway, um, you've seen the heart rate monitor chart that I sent to you, right? And it was like 7 hours of 144 beats per minute. What are your thoughts on that? I'll just explain to everyone else what they're seeing here. There's a number on the left hand side, 144, that has the heart rate at the point where the square box in the middle, the red square box is. It's one of the points in there. And from left to right, it's 7 hours long, the whole trace.
Right. So, I mean, my first thing is like that's your resting heart rate.
Well, see, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked that, because that tells me you're curious about what else might be going on with me. The doctors never asked those sorts of questions when they saw what they saw back from the tests. So you're wondering, is this my resting heart rate? Well, the backstory on that, no, this is a 7-hour bicycle I did over a day. It was 100 miles down and the next day 100 miles back, on this ride I do every year.
So that wouldn't seem extreme to me then.
No, not in that situation, but out of context, it's totally extreme. Right. So one of the beefs I have, and one of the things I do in business, I'm a management consultant. I help organizations improve service delivery and deal with improvement. And one of my beefs that I have in that field is what I call managing by spreadsheets, where people look at the numbers and they try to figure out how their business is running without actually walking the halls and see what people are doing. And I think in the medical community, that happens an awful lot. And to be fair, they just don't have time, right? So they see what's in front of them, then they go to meet the person, and then they have to make some snap decision, because they don't have time and they're not researchers. They're swamped with workload. And so I think this is a good example where you could jump to the conclusion, well, Wayne, that looks unusual if it's your resting heart rate. Oh, well, you're riding something. Well, that's not unusual. It explains a lot. Well, one of the other things that I came across that explains a lot is that endurance athletes typically present with something called athlete's heart. And athlete's heart is an adaptation of the heart based on these extreme things that we do over long periods of time, over many years. And the left ventricle gets, the muscle gets thicker, and the ventricle gets larger, that left half, because it's the one that's pushing everything out to your body. The other one's bringing stuff in. And the calcium level tends to be about 70% of what the population of that age is. And they don't know why. But they also say that they don't see a lot of endurance athletes having heart attacks. It's the people that are sitting on the couch that are having the problems. So again, another example of how what you're looking at can mean different things depending on knowing what else is going on, what the rest of the story is. So there's two things there that I've presented now. One is that the blood sugar issue was significant, but that was never addressed. I asked my family doctor, well, what should I do to do things better? And she looked up without looking up from her flip chart and said, well, you can go on a diet and lose some weight. And then she looked at me and said, didn't say anything, but realized, I'm 5'10", I weigh 170 pounds. I don't think I need to lose weight. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, well, this condition of athlete's heart, which if you dealt with a heart doctor who specialized in athletes, they'd have a different take on this. Um, so this led me to go down this path of eating differently. And I started by cutting back, no more Coke and chips. I also got rid of the potatoes and things like that. And I was eating a lot of fish. I was eating pork chops. I was eating eggs, breaking eggs for breakfast. I was no longer having my oatmeal breakfast that I'd have before a long ride. And I started to feel better, and I didn't even know I was feeling bad before that. Some of the things that went away was if I didn't eat every 2 hours, I get the shakes. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. And I also, when you're training for cycling distances, uh, there's something that we do once in a while, which is called a fasting ride. And the idea is to go on a nice slow ride, go for about an hour, don't have anything to eat, and just, you haven't had anything from the night before, you didn't have breakfast, you went for this fasting ride. And the goal of a fasting ride is to get your body to release fat more efficiently. Just like your heart and lungs get more efficient with exercise, releasing the fat is supposed to get more efficient. At least that's the theory. So I would go on these fasting rides. Well, partway through the summer of eating this way, eventually I was down to, no vegetables, but and just meat. But when I was just eating meat, about 3 months in, I'd heard about this thing about fasting for days is supposed to be something that's good for you, and I heard a little bit about that. So I thought, well, I was really busy the day before, and I missed lunch, and then I didn't get dinner that night, and it was the next morning. It was about 10 o'clock, and I hadn't eaten since the morning before, and I hadn't been doing any of these fasting. But I thought, well, this would be a good test. So about 2 in the afternoon, without having eaten anything since breakfast the morning before, I went for a bicycle ride, and I went for 2 hours, and I went like hell. And I didn't get hungry. I didn't get the shakes. I didn't fall off and faint. And so I came home and I didn't eat till the next morning, and I was fine. And so this is the difference in how my body behaved after I stopped. Now, one of the things that got me to this point partially is, as a kid, I used to run cross country. My mom would make my lunches for me, but I knew if I was staying after school to train, I'd need more. So I'd usually make some peanut butter and jam sandwiches. So, and being Canadian, pancakes and maple syrup every Saturday morning. I didn't really have much of a sweet tooth, but there was enough of that kind of stuff. And a Coke a day was kind of my routine thing. Uh, and so there's enough sugar getting into my body, although I didn't eat a lot of chocolate and so forth, and candies, but that was what I was taking in. And so over a lifetime of doing that, I guess it adds up, or maybe it's just age, I don't know. But certainly stopping eating that sort of stuff made this huge difference for how I felt on a daily basis. I also I was told I had irritable bowel syndrome. I had that most of my life. Every morning I had to leave an hour before I could do anything. That's no longer an issue. Once a week I have about 5 minutes here. That's it. But anyway, back to this fasting ride thing. Something that when I got into cycling and doing the long distances as opposed to just something under 3 hours, what I had a bad experience. My first 100-mile day. It was 100 miles down, 100 miles back. And the first time I decided to go on that big length of thing, and I've been training for a lot up to this, I'd never ridden more than 3 hours. And I think you can do anything on 3 hours without eating. But after that, you become depleted, especially if you're going at a high pace. And unlike walking, our bodies seem to be really well adapted to walking at a pace. If you look at a heart rate monitor, there's a band they say is the fat burning zone. Well, that's where you're not exerting yourself too much, but there's constant exertion. And the way it was presented to me is that it's like a conveyor belt. The muscles have glycogen stored in them, which is a type of sugar that they feed off of. So if you have a flight or flight response, there's immediate energy right there. And so that's what you use first. As you're going along, you start to use all that up. But then as that gets drawn down, then your liver, it's got a storage of glycogen and it sends it to the muscles to restock. So as you're using it, the liver is releasing more to fulfill the muscles. So you've got this conveyor belt going. But then once the liver draws down, the next place is long-term storage, which is body fat. So, and this is the whole principle behind a fasting ride, is try to get more efficient at releasing body fat to the liver to the muscles to activity. Um, and so I think by just eating this way normally, I think it's kind of like a fasting ride in that your body is adapting to drawing down the fat as an energy source much more efficiently. So that, now I can do a lot of things without having to constantly refuel. Now, when you're doing exercise at the pace of cycling, where I'm doing 30 kilometers an hour to 50 kilometers an hour, depending on the group I'm with or the terrain, that's a lot of exertion. And so my heart rate, I think my max was around 180 when I did this test. And I set 160 as my kind of my threshold, my limit that I didn't want to go over. Because on this one particular day, before I knew anything about anything, and I did my first 100 miles, I had, I think I was 55 at that time. And about an hour after lunch, so about 3.5 hours in, maybe 4 hours in, it was an hour after lunch. There's a first incline that I hit of the day. And to use a term they do in cycling, I bonked. Bonking means hitting the wall, the sound you make when you hit the wall. So I bonked and I crawled off my bicycle. I climbed up on a rock on the side of the road. Hundreds of people are cycling by me asking me if I'm okay. And I sat there for about half an hour before I felt like I could tackle this hill, and off I went. And I'd watched a movie some time before. It was a French movie, and there's the guy that was in it. He'd gone through some life thing, and he decided he was going to ride the Tour de France ahead of the Tour de France. And he got to a point on a hill where, and he became a bit of a celebrity because people found out he was doing this, and he was the underdog. And anyway, an old trainer came out of the woodwork and caught up to him, and he got to one of these big climbs in the Alps. And he said, just spin. Don't try to go fast, just spin. So for the next 4 hours, that was all that was in my head, is just spin as I went and climbed these hills, because I had no legs left. I had no energy left. I had a belly full of lunch, but that wasn't helping. And eventually all the energy started to come back as I processed things, and it started to circulate, and, I recovered, and I, finished strong, but I had 3 hours of just nothing in my legs. So that led me to learn more about the cycling energy thing. And so fast forward 2 years later, where now I'm really a lot faster than I was. I basically sprinted that whole distance, that 100 miles, up on the pedals, passing people, back on the seat, climbing hills like crazy. I was down to 165 pounds and solid muscle at that point. But I'd learned to eat. And I found, you had to start about an hour in, you had to start eating to make it through 7 hours. And my favorite thing to eat, to have the right mix of sugar, was Fig Newton cookies. They've got fig in the middle and they've got a dough on the outside, and it's not like eating candy bars or something. And so I was at a pace with how fast I was going where I was eating about one of those every 15 minutes for 7 hours. And if you do the calculation through my heart rate monitor, it's about, no matter what I ate during the ride, it was about a 6,000 calorie weekend. To make it that, no, about 6,000 calorie day, I guess, times two. So that's the kind of energy that you're burning doing that sort of thing. And you're not putting on weight. But I did notice there was a lot of people that were cycling that were kind of weekend warriors that all had bellies. And I thought, this makes no sense. I see some of these people out riding for so long, and how is it that they're not skinny? How is it they're not losing weight? And I realized it's because we're feeding so much that it's not even that we're in excess. It's just that your body gets so adapted to using the blood sugar that it doesn't do well at releasing fat. And so then you need the blood sugar, otherwise you're going to bonk. So you start feeding all the time while you're riding versus just using it to fill the gaps and a bit of a catch up.
And
So
no amount of exercise is ever going to be able to fight it back against that, right?
no, it's because it's not the exercise thing. The exercise puts you in a depleted position. What you really need to do is get better at the endurance side of things, and which we typically think about just heart and lungs, but it's also releasing fat into energy. And so I think again, by eating this way, where we're eating fat and protein instead of sugar, it's forcing the body to be better at that because you can't just mainline some sugar from a fizzy drink of some sort, the way we would. And that also leads me a bit of a disappointment about the industry that supports these sort of activities, because years ago when I used to cross country run, or midlife when I was skiing, cross country skiing or playing hockey, Gatorade was a sort of drink it didn't taste very good, but it had all the minerals and stuff that you needed. But then it got bought by the soft drink companies, and they changed the formula, and it doesn't taste as bad anymore. So I have to mix my own stuff because there's the sugar content in it is too high. And so you can buy these pills that they've got all the right stuff. You drop it in a bottle and it fizzes and releases the minerals, the electrolytes. Um, but to be a bit crude, it tastes like piss. And if I have usually when I start a ride, I'll have a clear bottle of water, and I'll have one of these fizzy ones that I'll keep. But I won't get on the fizzy bottle until about an hour in. Um, but if you get to the point where you're starting to get dehydrated, that stuff tastes unbelievably good. So it kind of speaks to the cravings of the body needing what it wants, because at that point I could guzzle a bottle of stuff and it just tastes so good, like better than Kool-Aid or whatever. Um, so
That's interesting.
elect yeah, yeah. And this same first long ride that I did, where I bonked on the way down that 100 miles, on the way back about the same distance, I dehydrated. And it's the first time in my life I've dehydrated this badly. I crawled under a picnic table, curled up in the fetal position, and I couldn't straighten any muscle in my body. And people brought me over, Gatorade and ice cream and all sorts of things, and then finally my body started to come back as I got the right stuff into it, and it recovered. But that also led me to the fact that you need not just water, you need electrolytes, and need to don't drink when you're thirsty, drink before that when you're doing these sorts of activities. So how does this all translate to just normal day-to-day life? Well, I think if you're eating every 2 hours at your desk, um, and not doing anything, then how are you ever going to learn to release fat into energy? You're just going to trigger the opposite to happen. Um, and as far as how do you get out of that cycle, I mean, eating this way has certainly changed that for me, because I just don't need to eat. I mean, I eat because I feel it's time to eat.
And so, are you doing just a very intuitive way of eating? Like you don't have any set times?
Um, I try to, well, I guess I've morphed into not having a schedule, or kind of having another different schedule that I've had. I tend to, where I used to wake up and eat about 5:30 in the morning and then go and do some stuff or get to my desk or whatever. It's now about 10:30 before I cook anything. And I usually have bacon and eggs for breakfast, or ground beef and eggs is actually something that I've started eating a lot more of. I also, lunchtime, a couple of days a week, I'll cook a roast. I'll put it on in the morning so that by lunchtime the roast is ready. About a 4 pound roast, and I'll eat about half of that. And then I'll keep the rest for the next 2 days. So there's lunch or breakfast. I'll stir that in on a frying pan with bacon and eggs. So that the bacon and eggs are my fat source mainly, because it's hard to get meat that's got the right amount. I was spending about, well, over $100 a day on steaks, and I realized that wasn't sustainable. So um, my snacks tend to be things like sausages, if I need some energy food, if I'm doing something, depending on what type it is, because some of them have fillers in them, and it depends whether it's got oatmeal or whether it's just meat. um, One of the things I found I do sometimes, and it's usually because I haven't eaten enough during the day without realizing it, but if I do feel like snacking in the evening, I'll throw on a steak then. And I never used to eat late at night, because you hear that it's going to pack away, and just you're not doing anything, it's just going to put on weight. And I've never been conscious of weight. I've never really had to be. But that was one of the things I just never did. I didn't eat other than potato chips and pretzels and popcorn at night. But now, if I get a craving for something, I'll just throw on a steak, and it might be 9 o'clock at night, and I usually sleep really well. As well when I do that, a lot better than I did before in my old life. So, um, the other things I'll do is I'll cook a full chicken, and that'll be one meal. I tend to eat the dark meat first, and I'll have a little bit of breast left over, but it's too dry to eat on its own. So again, that'll go on the frying pan the next morning with my bacon and eggs.
Oh, nice. And eating this way, you can be just as active as you were before.
Yeah, I haven't done an 8 hour day or 7 hour day yet. I've done 3 hours, and I don't need to eat on that ride. Although I do bring, different times I've brought things like I was bringing avocados for a while. I've replaced that with sausages. I might bring a bit of cheese for variety, but that's where you need the fatty sort of things. But uh, I guess it depends too on how much I've been training and how much body fat I'm carrying as to how much I should be eating when I'm riding, so I'm not losing weight. But no, I can do stuff like that. I can do endurance activities without having to either hit the wall or feed constantly to keep that pace. Took about 3 months to be able to get out of that cycle though.
Right. And so, like, what period of time have you been carnivore?
Uh, it's just about 3 years.
Wow, 3 years.
Yeah,
Um, and like people you ride with, are they interested in this? Do they think it's all a bit weird? Like you
I
got
don't
to
ride with anybody anymore.
Okay. I'm
I
just
don't
thinking
ride with
riding in
anybody
a
anymore.
group
I
with
don't.
sausages hanging over your handlebars or
Well,
something.
see, this is part of the reason I don't ride with anybody anymore. I don't ride with anybody anymore. I don't tell anybody about this. You've heard more about this than anyone else because people get so offended. It's crazy. I made on Facebook for a while, some of my friends and family, just private stuff. I made a couple of videos where I said and I kind of thought people knew about diabetes and sugars, and so I made this joke that I had this bowl, or no, I had a chunk of ham in my hand, and I said, "This is my morning muffin," and I chomped into this chunk of ham. And then in the afternoon, I had this small bowl of this is my afternoon snack. Now, normally that would be potato chips or something, and it's full of chunk of sausages, and I'm eating this. And the people that I knew went nuts about how I'm killing myself. And I thought, wait a minute, they don't even know that I'm eating this way all the time. All they see is that I'm eating sausages, I'm eating eggs, and I'm eating, ham. Um, but I thought it was implied that the ham was in place of a muffin and that the sausage was in place of potato chips. But if I had a bowl of potato chips, nobody would have gotten excited about that.
Yeah, it's very funny how we kind of don't see that as a bad thing in comparison to meat.
And that's the thing. It's compared to what, right? It's like if I'm eating a chunk of meat instead of something that's processed in a factory that's got all sorts of things you can't pronounce. Like, how is that worse?
Yeah, it's very strange because like you can see the logic if you replaced a carrot as a snack
Right.
with some meat. You can understand the
Yeah.
logic there because everyone goes, well, like naturally everyone's going to gravitate to a carrot being healthier because that's the way
Right.
we're educated, right? But
Yeah.
when it's like muffin to ham, it's like, hang on, there's a
Yeah.
disconnect here somewhere.
Exactly. And, I understand this to a degree because, growing up, we're of the age that, we really started to get bombarded with this margarine instead of butter, stay away from eggs, all this messaging. And then my dad, when he was in his 40s, late 40s, he had a stroke. No, he's 52 when he had a stroke. He had bypass surgery when he was in his late 40s. And I think the stroke was because they were trying some experimental stuff. They were basically going and scrubbing out the arteries, and I think a piece of plaque, broke off, and that's what happened. But anyway, he did have some problems, but he also had all his teeth pulled out in his 30s from gum disease. So there was more going on in his life. His appendix ruptured when he was in his 20s, and he almost died, and that was a couple of weeks of antibiotics. So that can't be good for you, these kind of things. So until I was in my late 40s, I was kind of freaked out that I might die from, I had a family to take care of and stuff, and it was a big concern for me for a while. But it didn't change. I mean, my activities weren't obsessive; they were just the things I enjoyed doing. But it was just something in the back of my mind. So yeah, I mean, you hear about the cholesterol issues and so forth. So I understand how we've been bombarded with this messaging. Uh, and like you say, a carrot versus ham, maybe. Uh, but just, I'll tell you what I was offended about. If people are offended by me eating this way, what I was offended about was when I discovered the link between diabetes and heart disease, and how I'd been lied to that sugar is way worse for you than cholesterol, apparently. Like, it's like the diabetes doctors and the heart doctors don't talk to each other, because if you talk to anybody about diabetes or read anything about it, it's really front and center, all the bad effects of getting that on your circulatory system, and leads to heart disease and as a risk factor and so on. But if you talk to the doctor, as I did with my heart surgeon, I said, one of the things is, he was saying, what kind of things do you do, and see if there's any. But he didn't really want to talk about diet or anything. But I did say, in these long cycle rides, I'm eating a lot of sugar. That's what endurance athletes tend to do. Is we go. He said that's okay. You're burning it up though. So I'm not sure whether this is, and there's a couple of different theories on this, but my own theory is it the amount of sugar that's circulating through your veins, and is it somehow corrosive or, or abrasive? One of the theories is that it's cleaning up all of the buildup in your arteries and calcifying it, which is safer, right? It's taking it from a kind of a mucousy thing to a scar instead of a scab. So that might be what's going on there. One of the things that I've learned about fermentation is that you need heat, you need sugar, and you need oxygen. And so when they talk about oxidative stress, I'm wondering, is there like some version of this happening inside our bodies, inside our blood vessels, if sugar gets in there? I don't know. So I know nothing about nothing, and I don't want to give anybody any advice about anything. But these are all things that, my engineering mindset is that I want to get to root cause. I don't want to treat symptoms. So what's going on that's upstream of this that is causing it? And I'm not going to stop exercise and replace exercise with statins.
Right. I think you hit on one of the key issues with not being able to get to the root cause if you're going through doctors, and that's that the doctors in each specialization don't seem to be talking to each other.
Yeah. And,
And
I also kind of describe it like a horse race between different specialties, whether it's cancer or diabetes, or, you've got all these things in your lifeline that might get you, and which one's in the lead. And none of the doctors want their one to be the one that takes you out.
and when the body's a complicated system, and like say diabetes doesn't exist on its own. Like there's a lot of downstream impacts to that, and so if someone is in there presenting with some kind of heart disease, then you can't just go, oh well, that's a statin deficiency, get on a statin as quickly as you
Well,
can.
and if you look at there's no drug that doesn't have a data sheet that comes with it that tells you about the things that, may be mild or major side effects of it. And, they do have an effect on your liver and on your ability to process sugars, which leads to, insulin issues. So it's really whatever, and I don't want to demonize statins, because I think some people might kind of, in my mind, it's either my decision was, if I'm going to treat this with exercise, I'm not going to take that stuff because it's going to stop me from getting out of bed in the morning if I hurt. On the other hand, if I resign myself to the fact that I'm going to sit on my couch for the rest of my life and do nothing but eat popcorn, then okay, give me the shot, because that's, right. So there's always a risk. I teach risk management, and there's always, the worst of the two evils, the preventative versus the remedial, there's all sorts of ways to look at risk, the impact versus likelihood, and so any of those things on the package aren't things that I want to deal with right now. And I also read that, at 70 years old, I'm 61, going on 61 this year. And at 70 years old, they tend to scale back on statins because your body might not be able to tolerate them anymore as you start to get more feeble and so on. And I thought, well, if you can't tolerate it then, that means there must be a level of toleration required, which doesn't sound like something I want to subject myself to if I can just get on my bicycle. And I thought, well, if this stuff is so good, why aren't we like putting our kids on it? And then I read somebody was actually talking about putting kids on it. So, um, I think that's a decision everybody has to make on their own, depending on their lifestyle and where they're at, and what their life hopes are, I guess, for life expectancy. I've got a do not resuscitate order. I've decided I also road race motorcycles, so I'm doing 170 miles an hour, dragging my knee on the pavement. If I take myself out and I'm in bad shape, I'm okay with going away. Not everybody is though. So for me, I'm willing to roll the dice, and it's my risk to take, and decide that exercise is what I'm going to go for, and eating meat is what I'm going to go for. And other people may not be comfortable with that risk, so they'll want to go in a different direction.
You've been at this 3 years. You're eating in a way that is helping you maintain the energy you need for the exercise level you've got at this point. Do you think you'll stick with this going forward?
Well, my goal initially was to get my body to a point where I could be a lot more flexible in what I ate, so that I could have, a meal with relatives, and not, end up 2 weeks later with these massive cravings for sweets because you're doing that, getting getting off the addiction. And I find that I can eat that way for about 3 days, maybe 4 days before I start to get the shakes again and everything else. So, I will have other things if I'm out with family for me, but I tend to go, about 3 months at a time before I get into those situations. Um, Something else I've started experimenting with a little bit is adding sauerkraut to my ground beef, because it's fermented. The sugar should be already dealt with, and it's, frankly, it's cheaper. So, I don't know where I stand on that, but I'm experimenting a bit with that being my only source of carb energy, if at all. But it's, again, it's fermented cabbage, so it's, I'd rather have the fermentation happen before I eat it than after. But I'm not sure where I stand on that one, but that's an experiment.
Yeah, and I
I
think that's
also
where Dr. Sean O'Mara kind of falls on the carnivore way of eating. He's kind of including some of that, and also some kimchi, I think.
I've never
Mm.
tasted kimchi. I'll tell you what I have tasted. I brought a bag of these for you to show. Um, I don't know if we can see them here. They're pork rind. Now, I'm not recommending people eat pork rinds, but I want to tell you another story. So pork rinds are made from the fat of pork, right? Right off under the skin of an animal, and they're tasty, and right. But I was at the racetrack. You camp overnight at the racetrack. Everybody else tends to get together with beer afterwards. And they pull out the Doritos and the potato chips and everything else and start passing them around. And I brought my pork rinds. And when we were kids, we used to eat these things all the time. Like, they weren't a foreign substance for us. But then they got demonized because they're, cholesterol and eggs and then pork and fat and all that stuff. So I discovered them again recently, and I guess about 2 years ago recently, because I was trying to get over the cravings as I was kind of yo-yoing initially. Well, closer to 3 years yo-yoing initially off of the carb withdrawal. I just needed something to satiate myself, and I thought maybe that'd help. But I found something really interesting. I can't eat many of them because just a few, and if any salt cravings or whatever else, and I'm done. I don't go. Whereas if that was a bag of something else, I'd just plow through the whole bag and I'd be looking for the next bag. So whatever it is they're putting in our snack foods seems to be addictive as heck. I can't walk away from it once I've started. And but all the people around the campfire that night looked at me and they said, "You know what they make those out of?" And I said, "Yeah." But they're plowing through bags of Doritos and stuff. So I thought, how is this worse? I eat like one
Yeah,
handful of this and I'm done.
right. That's quite funny. You know what they make these out of? Because I sure don't know what my potato chips are made out of.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's the interesting thing is, you have a few and you're done, because
Right.
they're designed to be pork rinds. But then if you look at, say, Pringles or something else,
Yeah.
right? You can't stop eating them because they're designed to make you eat them more, nothing else,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And it's interesting, in North America, a lot of the snack foods are owned by the soft drink companies. And I find myself, I remember this dilemma that I'd always be in when I get into binge snacking, that, you'd have a bite of something, you'd eat that handful. And then, okay, now you've got a craving for the soft drink. So you drink that. But now you have a craving for the salt. And it's like, which taste do I want to end my snacking on? I could never decide. So I'd open another can and open another bag. Whereas with this, I have three or four and then I'm done. I've also replaced beer. I know a lot of people that are starting to eat this way out of fads because they're like, especially younger people I know, because they see the YouTube videos and stuff. But they're pounding back so many beers. I think, how is that a low carb diet? So for me, I take, I usually have one of those coffee mugs with a cap on it, it's stainless steel thing, and that's what I take to the campfire, and it's full of sparkling water and a slice of lemon. Nobody knows what I'm drinking; it doesn't matter.
Right.
But
And often in those
that
situations, it's just being able to have something in your hand is enough, right? It doesn't
exactly,
have to be a beer
exactly,
or whatever, you know?
yeah, yeah. So that's kind of where the eating thing has gone. I had a couple of things that I wanted to mention for anybody that did my heart doctor. One of the things he said to me, first of all, he was really concerned because I wouldn't get on the statins. And so the second meeting, he really was concerned. I said, look, I'm concerned about the muscle pain and whatever else that might come from this. And he said, well, do you have insurance? And I said, no. And he said, because we give you injections because those are, people tolerate those more. And I thought, that sounds like an upsell to me. And then I realized I don't think he's really trying to upsell. That's the way it came across. But I think he really is doing it out of concern because he opens people up and he sees what's inside, and he deals with people in their worst situations. So I've started giving them a lot more leeway in my mind that way now. But anyway, what I did say to him was, because he was really kind of dejected that I was leaving his office and there was nothing he could do to save me, and I said, uh, I'm just going to go and grow some more blood vessels. And he got all excited. That's actually a thing. And I knew it was a thing, which is why I said it. There's uh, endurance athletes. One of the things I heard years ago, and I never understood this, was that if you've been an endurance athlete for a segment of your life, you'll probably do better than most people later in life. And I didn't understand why. And I did some reading on this, and it turns out that under exertion, it's just like a river that's bursting its banks. Fluid water finds its own path, right? Path of least resistance. Well, if you're trying to, if a muscle needs more, blood vessels will migrate to the muscle, and you get a whole bunch more new blood vessels. And they're small, but a bunch of small ones can give more capacity. So it is something that happens, to the fact that they're actually trying to develop drugs that will make this happen just by taking a pill. So my advice to everybody is get out and walk at least, if nothing else. Don't just rely. I've got this saying that, you can't, I don't believe you can eat yourself healthy, but I think you can eat yourself unhealthy. And so stop eating unhealthy and get a little bit of movement in your life. And that's probably, better than a lot of things that we can do. But he asked me as well, he said, how did you get into training how do you train for an event like that? This 200-mile weekend. And I said, well, I started doing spin classes when I was 40. And, then he kind of looked dejected because, that's a lot of years to train for, for something. But my own story for that was kind of interesting because I, I was doing weight classes for a little while, trying to get back in shape. And I realized I didn't have a lot of time to work on this every day. And I thought, so if I'm going to work, I'm going to work on the biggest muscles in my body, which is my legs. So I started doing spin classes instead. And so I went to, one of these exercise bike classes, and the instructors go, go, go. And I'm 5 minutes in, and I'm falling off my bike, and my tongue's hanging out, and I'm dying, and I leave. And the next day I come back again, and I try it again. And I get maybe 10 minutes in, and I'm dying, and I leave. And that's as far as I can get. And I keep leaving. And so fast forward to if anybody ever asks me, how do you get started? Here's my advice. This is my New Year's resolution for everybody every year. Phase one is just show up. So even if you show up at the gym or whatever it is that you're doing and you wander around and leave, that's okay. Just show up and do that for a month. Now you're in the routine of showing up. And you might do something while you're there. The second thing, once you're used to showing up, is don't leave. So my spin class example, go for 5, 10, 15 minutes, then I'm dead, and I just put my head down to ignore the instructor and everybody around me and just take the weight off and spin and make it to the hour. And so don't leave. Well, after a week of trying, I finally didn't leave for the first time. Um, and then, now you can not leave. And then the third phase is now exercise hard at the beginning, hard at the end, recover in the middle, and then you start shrinking down the recovery period. And that's how I got to being able to do these sorts of activities. But when I started this, as I think back, I was bringing snacks to spin class because I needed them. Now I can do 3 hours without because I'm not eating the sugars and all the pre-workout stuff and whatever else comes
You
along with it.
can you can go 3 hours without thinking about food. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, before 3 hours is a kind of a magic number for some reason for me at least, because before when I was fit and I was training all the time, um, if I went more than 3 hours and didn't eat anything at the level of exertion that I was going, when I came home, I would eat everything in the fridge, and there is no way you could stop me. It was like a zombie invasion. Like there was nothing that I could do. If you were in my way, I don't care how much bigger you are, you're not holding me back, and everything in the fridge is gone because you get to that depleted state, and it sneaks up on you. I don't get those situations anymore.
That's awesome. Um, yeah, but the thing is, you understand this being able to go this length of time now without feeling hungry or without needing to be refueling and raiding the fridge, right? But if
Right.
you were to explain this to someone who's on a regular diet, like that they could get to this point, they just can't imagine it, right?
No, you're right. I mean, we can talk about the highs and lows and the troughs and the valleys, right? And that, from I think a logical standpoint, makes sense. That if you can level that out, and that's the idea of not having candies but having potatoes or something, is try to get to that point. So we're just taking that to another extreme. But one of the things I heard about in terms of trying to change people's minds is logic doesn't do it, but emotion does. So you've got to appeal to the emotional side. What are they afraid of? Is one of my big questions when I deal with people. Like I do organizational change and organizations, and that's always a big question especially when somebody gets agitated. Like, what are they afraid of? Not they're a bad person, but rather I wonder what they're afraid of. And so I think that's a lot of it. And we've been bombarded with so much messaging on how this is going to kill us that everybody thinks they're trying to save me. So you got to appeal to the emotional side. Look, I understand, bad things happen to your parents or whoever, but I don't try to convince anybody either. I just I've decided that there's too much ingrained learning out there, and it's not my job. And what if I'm wrong anyway?
Assuming someone came to you and said, "Okay, well, Wayne, I'm ready to try this." How
Yeah,
what advice would you give them for getting started?
I would say the first thing to do is, and I've learned about this recently, or at least heard. I don't know how factual it is about how your body processes sugars versus other things, and the advice that at least don't mix them at the same meal. So I'd say leave the toast and jam off your plate of bacon and eggs in the morning if you're going to do that. Right? Don't be afraid of that. Don't maybe do without the pancakes in the morning. Dinner maybe you're going to eat differently. It's the just show up thing, right? It's the give them an opportunity to start changing things slowly, get used to, and then the more you do it, the more it's. I mean, I've heard you say this, and I've felt the same way. That the idea of eating or drinking certain things now it's almost repulsive because like that sweet taste is like it's just so uninteresting. So I think it's okay, and it's just like the spin class. Rather than shaming somebody for leaving the room, just hang in there. Dial it back. We're with you. We got you, right? Um, and I think also, having been warned about what happens with, and I'm not even sure it's dehydration. Everybody talks about electrolytes and the cramps, and I've certainly gone through those. And the yo-yo eating, you're always back into that. I'm not even sure it's just electrolytes. I think it's similar to when the glycogen stores in your muscles are depleted and they cramp. So maybe we're going through a bit of that as we're getting more adaptive to releasing fat to energy. But that's the first thing. Just try a few meals like this and mix in with some other things. And even if you're going to have like a breakfast that I would make for relatives when they come over. Steak, eggs, and avocado slices. And it presents nice on the plate, looks good, and everybody feels like, oh, I'm eating well, right? So,
Yeah, it's kind of like there's something green on the plate. I can be okay with this. It feels balanced.
yeah. And then after a while, you just don't put the avocado on the plate anymore. So that's one of the problems I found with eggs is if you like them, runny yolk, what do you sop it up with? There's no toast. So what I've started doing is ground beef on the frying pan, and when it's just about done, I'll crack a couple eggs on top of it, and put a lid on it and let it cook that way. So that's how I deal with the yolk because I don't want to overcook the yolk uh, for some reason. Um, so that's
Nice.
kind of the first advice to get you. Um, as far as the you know just show up, don't leave. Well, start doing the harder stuff now. The harder stuff is those freaking cravings you get when the carbs are calling your name, and that's where I keep things around like pickles and cheese and just anything that has more flavor. But also, again, like cooking a steak at night, it's once you've had that, like you're not interested in other things again. But recognizing that that passes and you just have to get through it. So I don't know if there's a weaning off that works better than a just cold turkey. I think that's probably a better strategy. And I also think, there's two ways to look at success in life. And I do this in my coaching when I do business coaching and so forth. And one way is you set goals and you work backwards from that, right? And then you measure your progress towards those goals. But another way, if you're really not in like if you're starting from ground zero, and maybe there's been some things that have disrupted you in the past, and you just need some momentum and a helping hand, and if you're really down, this is even more important is don't compare how far you've gone, but how did you do better than yesterday? And that's huge, right? Did I do better than yesterday, even if it's a little bit? Because sometimes those goals are so far away that they're intimidating, and people either just give up because it's not worth it, or it's scary, or whatever else. So wherever you are on that, are you ready to shoot for higher, or are you just trying to do better than yesterday, and maybe you leave the chips alone?
Right. I like those ideas because it's really good for someone getting started, but also for someone that's fallen off the wagon and trying to get back on. If they just
Right?
focus on just showing up, and they might still have those little digressions here and there, but it's just okay. Well, you've done it, acknowledge it, and then just show up again, and just
Yeah.
keep showing up, and eventually they'll stick with it.
Yeah, I have a confession to make. Last week, I bought this package at the grocery store of fresh. You smell them coming out of the oven. Fresh apple turnovers, and I went to buy some bacon and some eggs, and I ended up buying these and sitting down with a coffee and going through all four of them, and then feeling terrible and wondering why the heck did I do that? But I didn't beat myself up over it. I just did it, and I realized next time I go in the grocery store, I'm going to turn right instead of left.
Yeah, and that's the important thing is kind of going, why did I do that? Okay, well, not doing that again.
It's no different than the way you feel after a bender if you drank too much.
Yeah. So, Wayne, if people want to reach out to you, do you have any way of getting in contact?
I've got a LinkedIn profile that I use for business, so that's probably the best way to reach me if anybody has. I speak at conferences on business topics and coaching and those sorts of things, but I don't really give a lot of advice on this sort of thing. I mean, if somebody finds themselves in a spot where they're stuck, certainly find me there. But
No worries. I'll include your LinkedIn profile link in the show notes.
okay.
Um, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, Wayne. I really appreciate your time.
Well, I thought when I heard you call out for people that weren't just trying to lose weight, and because that was never my goal. I never had that problem. So I hope that this gives a different perspective.